Hi there. Welcome back to the step-by-step guide on how to write an A-level law essay. If you haven't seen my first video on statutory interpretation, I would recommend that you do so as it is an introductory video to my channel and how my video guides work. Before we begin, please note that this video guide will be most effective for you if you already have some basic knowledge of the relevant chapters that I will be discussing. In addition to that, I will not go through every single detail of the content of the essay in the first video as it is meant to be a quick tutorial. As this is part 1 of the video, detailed explanation and discussion of the contents of the essay will only be done in part 2 of this video guide, where I will go through the essay with you in detail. If you find this video guide useful, please like, share and subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to click on the bell button to get notifications of new videos as I will be making video guides every week. With that said, let's get started with part 1 of video guide number 3. The question of the day reads, consider how delegated legislation has played an important role in the development of the law and critically assess the possibility of the practice also being a threat to democratic lawmaking in Parliament. To answer an examination question, we must first take note of two things. Which chapter is the question covering and what is the focus of the question? By first considering these two aspects of the question, we will know how to address the question properly. From the question, we can infer that this question covers the chapter Delegated Legislation. And the focus of the question concerns the importance of delegated legislation and the possibility of it being a threat to democratic lawmaking. As per usual, a complete essay needs to be structured properly. Therefore, our essay should include an introduction, relevant points, and finally a good conclusion which addresses the question. Introduction. Before we address the question on delegated legislation, we should first briefly define laws and sources of laws, especially written sources of laws made by Parliament as Acts of Parliament. The reason for a quick introduction on sources of laws and Parliament is because delegated legislation is very much a part of what written sources of laws are. After that, we should briefly define delegated legislation and mention its relation to Parliament. It should be noted that this is only a quick preview of the more detailed explanation that is to come once we go into the contents of the answer. Therefore, a very brief mention as to its relation to Parliament will suffice. For the thesis statement, in order to determine if delegated legislation threatens democracy, we should first discuss the workings of delegated legislation and its regulation. As lawmaking and democracy are very controversial things, it is best that we develop our answer properly by going through the workings and its purposes before we can actually make an informed decision on whether or not delegated legislation threatens democracy. This is a very good type of essay where we can flex our knowledge and opinions on constitutional and civic matters with critical thoughts about the subject. Point 1. As an extension to what has been teased in the introduction regarding delegated legislation's relation with Parliament, we can now discuss the workings of delegated legislation by highlighting the concept of an enabling act. Delegated legislation is derived from its parent act or enabling act, which prescribes its parameters and procedures for lawmaking. It can generally be seen as a canvas for which detailed laws can be inscribed upon by the people who have been delegated the power by Parliament to make in Parliament state. Of the many forms of delegated legislation, at least the three main types of delegated legislation should be highlighted, with its workings and methods for lawmaking briefly illustrated and explained. These are orders in council made by the Queen and the Privy Council, statutory instruments made by government ministers and government departments, and bylaws made by local authorities and public corporations. After that, we can briefly explain some of the reasons for the need for delegated legislation and highlight some of the good points of delegated legislation in the whole lawmaking process. The discussion of some of the most important reasons should be directed at addressing the question on how delegated legislation plays an important role in the development of the law. An example to highlight can be the fact that delegated legislation allows people or bodies or people with more specific skills, knowledge, and responsibilities to make or change laws for specific purposes, especially in emergency situations. Point 2. Because the question concerns with how delegated legislation may have threatened democracy, we should now briefly introduce the fact that there are controls for which to regulate it. In this point, we are actually still discussing about the workings of delegated legislation, and so we should not properly address the issue with how it threatens democracy yet. This should be done after the facts about the controls are considered. Explain parliamentary controls in detail by going through some of the methods for which it uses to regulate delegated legislation. Other than the Enabling Act, we should also briefly discuss about the other ways in which Parliament can actually regulate delegated legislation. This would include the scrutiny committees, affirmative resolution, and negative resolution. Explain judicial controls in detail by going through some of the methods for which it uses to regulate delegated legislation. The emphasis here should be on the explanation of how judicial review works and the concept of ultra vires, with some case examples to illustrate its regulation on abuse of power or powers that were not executed according to procedures. Point 3. Re-evaluate the workings of delegated legislation and the controls available to regulate lawmaking by way of delegated legislation. We will now have to bring together everything that we have discussed about the workings of delegated legislation and consider if, overall, it has threatened the concept of democratic lawmaking. A brief introduction and discussion on democracy and democratic lawmaking should also be done. This is to highlight the importance of democracy and how the development of laws should be influenced by the masses rather than an individual who possibly is not even democratically elected to do the job of lawmaking. The highlight of this point is important before we can critically evaluate the question on delegated legislation's threat to democracy. With that in mind, we can now link the discussion back to the focus of the question. To do this, it is important to include our own views, comments, and opinions on whether or not delegated legislation actually threatens democracy. One of the things that candidates can highlight is the criticism that delegated legislation has taken lawmaking away from the democratically elected and allows non-elected people such as political appointees from certain government departments to make laws. This can be made worse if subdelegation is also practiced within the department. However, this can be contrasted by highlighting the basic concepts or aspects of parliamentary control over delegated legislation. For example, Parliament has the final say on what becomes law by way of affirmative resolution. Conclusion. To conclude, we should briefly summarize what we have discussed throughout the essay. The summary should briefly highlight some of the most important points of the essay which addresses the question properly. Lastly, we should address the question by stating our stand on whether or not delegated legislation actually threatens democracy by briefly highlighting some of the most important points to support our view. After much critical thought and discussion, a conclusion can be made and must coincide with our general view throughout the discussion. Before I end the video, let us just review the whole answer one more time so that we can prepare ourselves to write the full essay. Since the question concerns the importance of delegated legislation and the possibility of it being a threat to democratic lawmaking, we have endeavored to introduce our approach to the essay by stating that we will develop our essay by first going through the definition and the workings of delegated legislation and its types, where we have also stressed its importance in the process of lawmaking. After that, we have explained how the making of laws by way of delegated legislation is also regulated by both Parliament and the judiciary. Finally, to address the second part of the question, we have endeavored to re-evaluate the practice of delegated legislation and related it to the question on whether or not it is a threat to democracy by first highlighting the importance of democracy and democratic lawmaking. This is the end of the video guide. I hope it has helped you in your legal studies. Do check out part 2 of this video where I'll go through with you the full essay answer of this question. I will link the video in the description below. If you have any questions, comments, or any suggestion on what other topics you would like me to cover, please leave a comment on this video. And again, if you find this video guide useful, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel as I will be uploading new video guides on different topics every week. Thank you.